our 30th Talks with Terri. We will be recording this today. And I want to, today, our special guest is Secretary Nellie Gorbea. I want to welcome her and thank her for taking this time out with us this morning. And with that, I will give you the introduction. I do have some prepared questions that I'll ask first, and then we'll open it up to the people online to ask their questions directly. Good morning, Secretary.
Good morning. Good morning, Representative.
I
have the floor.
You got the floor.
Right. Sorry. Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much. You know, I miss seeing wonderful people like Representative Cortvriend in the hallways of the State House this year. And, you know, it's been a pleasure, you know, being there with her from the very beginning when she kicked it off. And what was it? The tacos with Terri.
Oh yeah, remember? That's right.
To see her just take on, I mean, she was already a leader in her own right in the community, and having been elected and everything, but to see her come into her own at the State House has been wonderful. And it's part of this whole big, wonderful wave of women elected at the State House that are really, really making a difference. Someday when the State House opens up again to the public, I hope you will see, we did a, right before COVID closed everything down, we did a display of women electeds in the State House, in the General Assembly and the Senate. In the General Assembly's Senate and House. And it's a really wonderful display of, you know, sort of where things are. We did it to commemorate the 100 years of the passage of the 19th Amendment. But anyway, so the representative asked me to talk a little bit about what the Secretary of State does. Not everybody realizes all the different functions. And it varies from state to state. So for those of you who are from somewhere else or grew up somewhere else, every state is slightly different. Some states like New York have their Secretary of State to be appointed by the governor. In the case of Rhode Island, it's one of the 5 elected general officers. And there are 4 main areas of responsibility under the Secretary of State. Elections, which I'm sure we'll talk about much more. In Rhode Island, I'm the chief state election official, but we also have 2 other major partners in this work, the Board of Elections and the local boards of canvassers, which are separate entities. The Board of Elections primarily runs the day of elections with help from the local boards of canvassers. I prepare the ballots, I certify election results, I administer oaths of office, and I guard and maintain the central voter registration system, which is a computer database that houses our voter rolls and candidate lists and really serves as the backbone of the election management of the state. And that's become a really important duty of this office. But in addition to elections, which is very hot right now, we also have in my office the Business Services Division, which maintains the state's business registry. And you know, there we record business formations and ongoing business activity. We also provide thoughtful guidance and comprehensive services to those who are looking to start and maintain a business or a nonprofit in Rhode Island. And if you go to that particular page of the website, which is sos.ri.gov, you'll see a ton of resources. We've tried to be this place, one-stop place where you could go, figure out not just sort of how you should register, but what are the other steps. We have like a business assistant tool that walks you through your type of business and what are some of the requirements that it might need, and what are the costs that you might incur going forward. We also have archives and public information. The archives are the historic records of government in the state, and we have an amazing history here in Rhode Island, being one of the original 13 colonies. There are not many other states that have, well, there's only 12 other states that have an original draft of the Bill of Rights, original copies signed by John Hancock of the Declaration of Independence. And so those are some of the amazing documents that we have. And what I try to do with those is to process, preserve, and give public access to the hundreds of thousands of historic documents and public records that show how government has evolved and what it has done through time. And importantly, in this public information area is that I regulate lobbying activity in the executive and legislative branches of government. Principally, what that means is that any lobbyist has to register at our office. When I came in, we had just suffered the horrible case of 38 Studios. And what the good thing that came out of all of that is that I was able to pass a really comprehensive lobbying registration and tracking disclosure law that has made it incredibly transparent and easy, not just for people wanting to see what's happening, but also for the lobbyists as well. So that's a little bit about what I do in my office, and I'm happy to take questions, not just about elections, but about any of those areas. Did you want to then now?
Excellent. Oh, are you ready? I didn't mean to step on you.
Nope, go for it.
Okay, so I do have a couple questions that were pre-submitted. Can you talk to us about early voting? And people might be a little confused about they're hearing the term emergency voting and early voting, and what can we do to expand this in the future?
So emergency voting is a term I will say is a historic term. We used to have a process called emergency mail ballots, where you had to swear that you had an emergency in order to vote between the time period between when mail ballots are due and election day. If you think about it, we can't be sending out mail ballots all too close to election day, because then by the time since the ballots have to be into the Board of Elections by 8 p.m., which is when polls close on election day, you don't want people walking around with ballots that then don't get back in time. So there's a deadline for when you can request a mail ballot, and that's 21 days before the election. And then in that time period of 20 days to the day before, it used to be called emergency mail ballot. So it would be the same process as a mail ballot, very paper intensive. You had to apply for it. You then had to go to the clerk. They had to do all this paperwork. And increasingly people have found that that's more convenient for them. And so have started showing up more and more. Just a few weeks ago, we passed into law early in-person voting. That makes that 20-day time period a time period when you can go and vote early. You show up just as you would at a polling location. You show your voter ID. You're checked into a poll book. You get a ballot. You vote on it, and you put it yourself into the machine. That's the process now with early in-person voting, which is what the law allows people to do in this day and age. Now, some of the town halls are closed, and we're trying to figure out sort of what all of this means. But the best thing to do if you think that you're going to vote early in person is to call your city or town hall and make sure that you understand what are their parameters for accessing town hall.
Thank you. That's great. And so we shouldn't be worried about this pledge. That's not really, once you put your ballot into, nobody's going to come back and second guess you.
No,
right?
No. And actually, I mean, again, it goes back to a time period when, so what we have is that voting has changed over time, just as who's eligible to vote has changed over time, right? And for the better. We have a system basically that's now trying to catch up to universal suffrage. Universal suffrage means that working people get to vote, people without land get to vote, people of all different kinds of races get to vote. And one way of voting doesn't meet all of that diverse population needs. And so our voting systems need to be able to address the complexities of people's lives and make sure that everybody who's eligible to vote can and does vote. So in Rhode Island, we've been moving over time from a position where only one day was allowed for voting to, okay, well, maybe you have an emergency, and so now you're gonna like squeeze out sort of mail ballots or emergency mail ballots, to now 3 options for voting, which are you can vote from home by requesting a mail ballot. You could vote in the 20 days before the election early in person. And by the way, if you show up at city or town hall, similarly as you would for elections, with an ID that somehow, like your driver's license, you know, because there's limited access to DMV, is expired, you can vote by provisional ballot. So it's the same rules that happen at a polling location on election day. It's just that you're doing it earlier.
How do you cure that if, that's an interesting thing you bring up with the DMV being very restricted right now. So if that it was the case, if my driver's license is expired and I go in provisional ballot, how is that? How do you resolve that?
It's the same curing that you would have if you didn't show up with a voter ID and said, I want to vote. Well, then the option then is to vote by provisional ballot, meaning you'll fill out an oath envelope where then the Board of Elections will verify the information and verify your signature and make a determination about whether, you know, you are the person that you say you are, and that vote should be counted. And so that
you don't have to come back with your valid ID. You don't have to rush out and go get, okay. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. I think people might have a question about that. Excellent. Somebody asked about the deadline for international voting or ballots that go out.
The deadlines, so the Uniform and Overseas Citizens Act, the UOCAVA Voter Act, guides our work with regards to military and other citizens who are overseas. And the big thing there is that we need to get ballots out to those overseas citizens and military folks 45 days or more before either the primary or the general election. Rhode Island makes it really, really, really stressful. And it is one of the reasons why I tried to move the primary date. And, you know, we succeeded by a little bit, but not much. But we have always succeeded, you know, by working really, really hard to get those ballots out in time. The deadline for receiving the ballots are similar to are the same as everybody else. So the ballots have to be back at the Board of Elections by 8 p.m. on election day. There are provisions for people who are, for example, not going to be able to do that, particularly people in the military. There are provisions to handle situations where that's not going to be feasible, even with 45 days or 30 days.
So they get a grace period?
No, they don't get a grace period. They're allowed to fax their ballots back.
Oh, okay.
Or there's a very specialized process.
Excellent.
To assure that ballot, particularly from our military men and women, do make it in on time.
Yeah, of course. We want them, of all people, they should have that right. That's good. I didn't know that. I'm glad to hear that. So we have changing topics slightly. I gave you the prep on this one. We'll see if Jason has come up with anything. There's a question came to me about the ballot measure to remove plantations from our state name, and if there will be a cost associated shared with voters on the ballot, like a fiscal note.
So I'm going to ask Jason, because we were actually looking for the referenda guide from, when was this? 2010, I think it was. Jason, do you have a
So it was in 2010 where the same question or similar question was asked. There's no reference to a fiscal note on that on the voter guide at that point. I didn't check to see if there was any differences in the language of the actual question that was passed by the General Assembly. So we can check that. But it just asked if there was any borrowing associated with the question, and obviously the answer was no at that point, but didn't have a fiscal note.
Yeah, the fiscal notes and referenda guides tend to be related to bond questions specifically. Mm-hmm. We legally have to inform voters of what are the costs of indebtedness. So my sense off the top of my head is that there isn't necessarily a requirement for something like the name change, because the state probably wouldn't be borrowing. It would just be put into the budget.
Right.
But that's
And
a really great question.
Some of those expenses have probably already been incurred because people are already, departments are removing that portion of the name. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I mean, and some of it is not. I mean, you can always. I know some of the business people here will say you can account for everything, but in my office, for example, we've already done that. For example, we've removed the Providence plantations from places where it was easily done, and then made a list of some of the harder ones or ones that are going to entail a larger cost, so that we can determine, sort of whether to go forward with it or not once the measure is decided on by the voters.
Great. So I'd like to open it up. Does anybody on the call this morning have a question for the secretary that we haven't addressed yet?
We have a question from Jessie. If she wants to open up and ask it directly.
Jessie, you've got the floor.
Jessie.
Oh, you're still muted.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect. Good morning.
Good morning. One summer we were in Nova Scotia, and there was a way we got some paperwork ahead of time knowing we'd be away, did a bunch of stuff online and mailed it, so that if it didn't get in on time, it would be credited afterwards, since we'd already done a bunch of stuff online. Is that still not, the case for overseas or military?
So no, I mean, the procedures for overseas and military have not changed. I would say that if you have somebody in your family that is facing that situation, that you call my elections division at 222-2340, or to send an email to elections@sos.ri.gov, because those are really specific voter situations that don't come up very often. I'm assuming, so this is with regards to Rhode Island. You're voting in Rhode Island. Yeah, so the procedures, to my knowledge, haven't changed. So what's important is any concern that you have regarding voting, speak to an election official. Don't go to the internet, to, blogs, to third-party sources. We have a really great voter information center here in Rhode Island. It's at vote.ri.gov. That should be your trusted source for elections related information. And if you have any questions, speak to your local board of canvassers, to your clerk, or to my office, or to the Board of Elections. Those are the people that can really answer definitively the questions with regards to very specific special circumstances.
And just to clarify, there is a provision in state law that does allow for uniform and overseas voters for their ballots to come back. I can't remember exactly the date, but the day after the election, or in a primary, I believe up to 3 days after in a general election. So that's a unique component of state law that allows for mail ballots from uniform and overseas voters to have a little bit more time for them to be returned, which may be the issue you might be talking about as well.
Yeah.
Sure.
And by the way, let me introduce Jason Martesian, my Director of Legislative Affairs, State House guru. I've asked him to staff me on some of these things. So,
Excellent. Thank you.
We have our next question comes from Caroline.
Caroline.
Hey, Caroline.
You're on mute, Caroline.
Oh, I can unmute myself.
There you go.
Wait on
Good
Donna.
morning.
Hey, Secretary of State. I miss seeing you at the State House.
Me too.
I don't know if people were aware, but you had a lovely art show in the basement of the State House around October of the end of last year, and I just want thank you. It was lovely. Please do it again. Are there plans to do it again?
Yes, we have now transformed, as part of our activities, we've got what used to be called the basement of the State House is now called the lower level. And we have a lower level art gallery there. And we are looking forward to post-COVID having many more exhibits and interesting. This is where most recently we had an exhibit around women legislators that walks through the path that they've taken over the last 100 years. But yes, thank you, Caroline. It's been really fun to bring new life to that space at the State House.
It was beautiful. Yes, that was excellent. So I don't know if Richard had a question. Did you have a question, Richard?
Sure, let me be myself again. Yes, so the mail-in ballots, we did the, I'm new to Rhode Island, so this is all new to me here. But we did the presidential, thank you. We did the presidential primary without needing the 2 extra signatures. Now we're back to the 2 extra signatures, and as you know, we're one of the few states that do that. And the 2 extra signatures is how, for example, in North Carolina, they had the election fraud because people picked up the ballots, so just promising they would sign it for them, and lo and behold. So what can we do to get rid of what apparently is an unnecessary 2 extra signatures, because we just proved in the previous election that we don't need them? That's my question.
Thank you, Richard. Richard, where did you move from?
Massachusetts.
Oh, well, welcome. You've moved up in life.
Yeah, I didn't realize that would be true watching you guys for 35 years, but now that I'm here, it's a lovely place to be.
And he moved into my district,
yes,
all the better.
Even better, even better. So yes, so so I have been fighting sort of this whole process of modernizing the elections from the day I moved into as Secretary of State, and most recently presented legislation this year in response to the pandemic. And the legislation was supported by more than a dozen good government civic groups like the League of Women Voters and Common Cause, and so it was an effort to comprehensively address voting in this COVID era. Among the things that I proposed was getting rid of the 2 witnesses or notary requirement on oath envelopes. That piece of that legislation was passed by the House, but not the Senate. And so the measure died. And at that point, I was left having to face this sad reality. I mean, we are the only state other than Alabama that has this requirement on the books. And I know Representative Cortvriend worked very hard to make sure that that measure passed on the House side, but unfortunately it failed. So what happened since then is, oh, and I'm sorry, and I might want to also explain that for June 2nd, you didn't have to do that because we had an emergency executive order by the governor. The legislature was not in place, and we were able to remove that requirement for the June 2nd presidential primary. But now we're no longer under that executive order in particular. And so we tried to do it the right way, which is to get the legislature to change the law. That failed. And as soon as it was clear that that was failing, I was sued by the Common Cause, the League of Women Voters, and 3 citizens, 3 voters here in Rhode Island. And we entered into negotiations with them and the ACLU to get rid of the 2 signatures. So right now, as we stand, we filed a consent decree that gets rid of that requirement. So we are processing our oath envelopes at the printer as we speak without that requirement. However, the Republican National Committee, which has been taking to suing a lot of states, including just yesterday, the state of Nevada, has filed an appeal at the First District Court. And we will have a hearing on that tomorrow at 2 o'clock. And they're suing to intervene to bring back that requirement. I just want to make it very clear to everybody here, and I'm going to say, you know, and for those of you who agree with getting rid of this requirement, I'll give you the talking points on why this is actually secure. The security of voting by mail, voting from home, is not in the witnessing or the notarizing of a signature. It is in the multi-step process that is done in an open and transparent way to verify that the voter is who it is. So In the case of Rhode Island, where you have to apply for a mail ballot, your application has a signature. That signature paper goes to your local board of canvassers. The local board of canvassers verifies that the person applying their signature, their information matches that in the voter registration system. Once they're approved, the ballot is sent out to them with an oath envelope that also requires them to fill it out and sign it. It is the signature, not the notary, not the two witnesses, that is the defining piece for verifying that that voter is who it is. And the oath envelope goes to a different group of people to verify this, which is the Board of Elections. And just recently, we purchased actually signature verification equipment for the Board of Elections to handle the huge influx that we believe will happen in November. So that, because this is actually a manual sort of visual thing, so they'll actually have a piece of equipment that will look at the voter signature versus the signature on the oath envelope to speed up that process. Whatever gets kicked back to the machine then gets reviewed in more detail by an actual person. No one is denied the right to vote without an actual election official making that determination after reviewing the case. This is something that's done in many other states. And we were an outlier requiring that extra hoop, which in these days of a pandemic really opens up people to the possibility of getting sick. And so I want to make sure that people can vote safely and securely. And I'm going to defend that right as we go through this in the Court of Appeal in Boston and all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to.
Excellent. So good luck tomorrow. I hope that works out. And yesterday, didn't we hear the president say that now he understands what mail balloting really is, voting by mail really is, and it's okay if you have a Republican governor? Did I take that?
What's really crazy is absentee ballots and mail ballots are the same thing. They are absolutely the same thing. And there are 5 states that vote entirely by mail. There are states where it's not even an application process. They're actively sending out ballots, real ballots, to anybody who's an active voter on their lists.
We can only hope for that to be happening here one day.
And the reason, yes, but change has to happen gradually in elections so people can absorb it. I mean, if you think about when I came in 6 years ago and how we've been able to change our election system to make it more accessible, it's been night and day. I mean, in these 6 years, we have purchased new state-of-the-art voting machines. We've improved the technology both at the Board of Elections and in my office. We've completely rebuilt the central voter registration system to be able to handle the needs of today by the clerks, but also be more easily defended against hackers and everybody else. We've done online voter registration. We've done automated voter registration. All of these processes take advantage of technology and have been implemented seamlessly and give voters greater access to the ballot box without compromising the integrity of our system. We're using technology to really bring about the promise of universal suffrage, which is that every voter's voice should count and they should have access to voting.
Excellent. When do they start counting the mail ballots, and when do you think in the upcoming primary on September 8th, when do you think we get results of that?
So counting and processing of the vote count is the purview of the Board of Elections, which is, as we said earlier, a separate agency. They do have the ability to start counting ballots as they're received in that 20-day period. Oh no, wait, no, this was, yes, sorry. I'm like mixing voting from home and then early in-person voting. I have to make that mental switch. So for the people who are sending the mail ballots, absolutely. They can start within, I think, a few weeks. That determination is made by the Board of Elections. No information is provided by the machines about what the count is during that counting process ahead of time.
Right.
And so it will really depend on what the the backlog is at the board and how they're able to manage the flow. For the presidential preference primary, you know, we had about 100,000 people vote from home, and the board initially said that it would take them a week. They actually ended up wrapping everything up within 3 days. We've now all gone through this process, so I expect them to be even better prepared. But that's really something that I would look to the board to be able to answer more definitively. What I will say this is, you know, when I first ran, it was all about fair, fast, and accurate in elections. It's now safe and secure. So the fast has to take a second tier to making sure that we're safe, that people can vote safely, that election officials can be safe, and that the system is secure and all the votes are counted accurately. So if there is one thing that I want you to understand about this election season is, yes, we may not have the results on primary night or on election night. Everybody needs to take a deep breath and just wait for the process to unfold. These are public processes, they're open processes, and we will have an accurate count in the end.
Terri, we have 2 questions waiting.
Okay.
Jonathan and Susan.
Okay. We'll go with Jonathan and then we'll take Susan.
Morning, Madam Secretary. With apologies to the political economist I stole this from, you know, an engaged citizenry is our greatest weapon against tyranny. And voting certainly is the single greatest action that we can take to be engaged. My question for you is, we find ourselves in a absolutely unique time for, I think, all of us that have been alive. And we find ourselves with the opportunity, I think, to become more engaged. It seems that there is still a tremendous amount of animus toward government. You know, the great they that people seem to hate is us, right? It's a participatory process. Likewise, there's apathy. I see tremendous efforts coming, you know, in the ways of workforce development out of the state government. And I'm curious if this is not an opportunity to engage or re-engage the citizenry and help them understand the correlation. You know, political economy was just that, the intersection of economics, philosophy, and politics. And it seems like we've divorced those from each other, so people don't understand that interface. And as the gatekeeper of our documented history in the state, as the registry of business, I think that there's an opportunity to come out for something to come out of the Secretary of State's office that would help engage our citizenry in a more productive fashion so that they become more connected with the process. And I would love to hear your thoughts on if you have an opportunity of that right now.
No, thanks, Jonathan. So even before all of this, you're speaking to my passion. I mean, I have spent my entire life trying to engage people with their government. And one of the joys about being your Secretary of State is having that opportunity. So, you know, what I found over the years is that government doesn't make that easy, whether it's because we're siloed, as you're saying, the economic will never meet the civics and things like that, or it's just in the way government acts, which is really talking down to people. And I told my staff very early on, there's no reason why a government form, whether it be a voting form or a business registration form, needs to be hostile. Meaning you look at it, you're all excited about starting this business, right? And then you go and you find the online form and then you're like, oh shoot, I don't really understand this. Like maybe I'm not good for this. Maybe now I need a lawyer. I don't know a lawyer, you know, like, so what we've done during my time has been to think of ourselves as there to help people. So rewriting everything in the office in a way that's simple, easy, that really calls out to the citizen to say, this is your government. You have all the right to access your government. And just even in the little things like a form or how a website is designed, you're telling people whether or not you want that engagement. And my premise is that for a very long time, government has followed the law, put out information in ways that really say to people, you have no right to be engaged. There's no, you know, go hang out over there. We'll take care of it. And and go away. And I think what we've done at the Department of State proves that you can do otherwise, that you can have tools that are more accessible to people. Now, you can also do some really fun, creative things. Like, for example, a couple of years ago, when we were still facing a poll worker shortage, I talked to a number of business leaders and found that Amica was willing to provide the opportunity to their employees to work at the polls and not have to charge vacation or personal time for doing so. You know, when you think about it, why has the demographics of our poll workers been people over 65? Because they're retired and they have time, or increasingly, joyfully so, it's been also high school students. But we're missing that middle demographic in polling locations that really, for whom going to work at the polls for 16 hours and doing a 3-hour training may not be the way they want to spend their one vacation day, you know, or some time out of their personal time. I actually think it's really fun, but not everybody does. So having those conversations with people in the business community to make sure that that's not penalizing folks that could otherwise serve as poll workers is an example of looking to do things in a different way that engages people. I hope that gives you, I mean, the mission of our office is to make government work for people.
And that does, and I appreciate your response. By, you know, way of transparency, I'm the CEO of Oliver Hazard Perry, Rhode Island. We operate the state's flagship. We're deeply invested in workforce development, but in a way that we also believe that you know, great jobs promote the opportunity to be civically engaged, ocean literate. You know, we understand that interface. And I'm just wondering if this is not the perfect time for you to reach out to your colleagues in commerce and say, you know, Stefan, if you're funding all of these opportunities for people to get trained with new jobs, you should demand that part of that training is that they have even if it's a cursory day where they get introduced to the way that government works and functions on their behalf. It's the power of the purse strings argument. You control the funding of the training. I think it behooves us to have that information transmitted, because often it is the disenfranchised, or it is those populations that have not had access to these opportunities historically that are availing themselves of these opportunities for workforce training. It's a prime time to give them a civics lesson as well.
That's fascinating. That is a really interesting idea, Jonathan, and I will give that further thought for sure. We've tried to do it in slightly different ways, not exactly as you're proposing, so I find it very intriguing. Thank you.
Great. Susan. Good morning, Susan. You have the floor. Yep. You're still mute. You were unmuted for a second. There you go.
Okay. Good morning.
Perfect.
Terry, thank you for putting this together. I'm sorry I came late to the meeting, so I'm sure there's a lot I missed. Madam Secretary, thank you for your information. I really appreciate it. And I'm wondering if you could revisit the this hearing or meeting that you're having at 2 o'clock, and sort of what is or who perhaps, what and who are the blocks to getting this requirement changed for signatures and witnesses to the ballots, and what could we do in your efforts to try to get this ruling changed? Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. So it is in the hands of the court, and the court, by its very nature, is not set up for, you know, advocacy in that sense. I would encourage you to continue to express yourself through social media about, you know, wanting to be able to have these options be simplified. But, you know, we're going to go to court. I feel very confident that we have a very good case. And I appreciate you wanting to join us in this effort. But to me, right now, the biggest push we're going to have is because there's so much confusion, you know, between, you know, people saying that, because this lawsuit does bring confusion, right? It's going to bring up the fact that there are two, you know, that there were these 2 signatures in notary. So once the dust settles, which I hope will be in the next few days, we have to push out the right information to people so that they don't feel that they need to answer that knock on the door or give their ballot to anyone.
Right.
You know, in 2018, I actually started putting postage prepaid on envelopes for mail ballots.
Exactly.
Because you shouldn't have to worry about finding a stamp. There are some of our younger folks are not as attuned to the ways of the postal service. So why for 49 cents, I'm going to somehow, you know, make it just a shade harder. And maybe that 49 cents is in and of itself is not the problem. It's the layers of difficulty that sort of add on to make it harder for people to vote. And so let's just peel off that onion and get rid of all those things and just hear what people have to say and respond to it accordingly. That is what our democracy is supposed to be about.
I gotta tell you, I had a 91-year-old constituent ask me for the mail ballot request form, and I almost felt bad thinking about all the steps that are required. I kind of almost felt bad about sending it because I was trying to persuade him to vote in the primary, which he initially was not inclined to do. And, you know, I did send it to him, but I was like, oh, I hope it's not too challenging.
No, it is. And again, it goes back to those little ways in which we subliminally tell people we're not really interested in you, when it should be absolutely the opposite. We may or may not be able to address everybody's needs, as the representative knows, but we should always be open to hearing from people, because like Jonathan's idea, you learn something new every day.
What about voting for disabled people, blind people, people with various, can you talk about that?
Sure. My office has had a really strong relationship with both the Rhode Island Commission on Disability and the various voting rights groups that deal with individuals with disabilities. So even from the design of the website, you know, it's interesting. A few years back when we were redesigning the Voter Information Center, I was hearing from some of my Democratic colleagues who were being sued by the disability groups. And I'm like, how could you have not thought of bringing them in whenever you're redesigning something? Because I know that I'm not going to see what they see for sure. But yeah, so we have been working very closely with them. The AutoMark machines, which are the self-marking machines, are going to be available through the 20 days of early in-person voting. That's a requirement. Excellent. Along with a booth for people to do the voting. So that's part of the considerations for setting up the early in-person voting. There are some voters who require Braille and tactile ballots, and they do contact our office, and we do provide them with that. So we have a number of ways in which we do try to make sure that anybody and everybody who is eligible to vote can and does vote.
And those Braille ballots get mailed out?
Yeah.
We happen to have 4 questions in the queue.
Okay.
Next we have Janine, I believe, or Jeannie. Sorry, my apologies. Okay. And then we have Beth, and then we have Robert, and then we have Jessie.
Okay, so we'll take them in that order.
Thank you. Good morning, Secretary of State, and thank you, Terry, for putting this on. It's my first time on a Zoom. I've been on other Zoom meetings, but not anything related to government. Thanks for your time this morning. Thank you. I had a question, and I came in a little bit late. I don't know if you broached it already, but as I'm sitting here listening to everything, I was just curious, what is the law? Not that I know of anybody incarcerated right now, but can you refresh me on the law regarding anyone on parole and incarceration in regards to voting?
Sure.
Thank you. That was my question.
Great. So Rhode Island passed some wonderful legislation that restored felons' voting rights or formerly incarcerated. So we, in Rhode Island, anyone, as long as you're not in a serving your sentence within a facility, you have the right to vote. So if you're on parole, you have the right to vote. And if you're awaiting trial, even if you're in the facility, you still have a right to vote. We have, in my office, we have made a very strong commitment to working with the Department of Corrections to ensure that people are notified of those rights and are able to access the ballot. We also have a process by which when someone is released from the facility, they're automatically re-registered, albeit at their former address where they were registered before. So when they go into serving their sentence in the facility, there's a marker on the database that takes them off the voter rolls. And then when they're released, we're notified by the Department of Corrections, and that automatically happens. They don't have to re-register when they come out. We've been working with some really wonderful, dedicated professionals at the Department of Corrections on doing some voter information activities. And I was able to go to the women's prison actually with one of the voting machines and do a little civics lesson on how you vote with a ballot and all that. And so it's an issue that's near and dear to my heart, and something that we absolutely work very hard to try to make sure that those Rhode Islanders that are eligible are also able to vote.
Great, thank you. Who's next, Donna? You're on mute, Donna.
I believe it's Beth.
Is it me?
Okay.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning, Beth.
Good morning. My question has to do with what we're doing right now, Zooming. And thank you, Terri, for allowing us to have this up close and personal conversation with our state leaders. Secretary Gorbea, a lot of us are attending our city council meetings and our planning board meetings using this platform. I'm wondering, what's the policy on participant lists? Some show and some don't. And I'm thinking it's sort of an open meetings kind of thing, that if we were in the chamber, we would know who was there with us. But for example, a planning board meeting the other evening in Newport, we didn't know who was on the call. So I was just wondering if there's a policy or protocol for that. Thank
Good
you.
question.
And I'm going to go on a limb and say that there probably isn't, because this is all so new. It's an interesting question, right? Because you would be able to see, if you were if we were all in person, we were able to see each other, but we wouldn't necessarily know who we are. We wouldn't necessarily know everybody's name. And so it's one of those interesting questions around open government and individual rights that I'll give that some thought.
I've wondered that myself when
Yeah.
I've been on a call, you know, who else? I think a lot of times the board or the council can see who's on the call, but like Beth says, the participants can't.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. I don't, to my knowledge, nobody's tackled that issue, and it may be something that we need to talk to the Attorney General's office. And I'd be interested, like I said, in the ACLU's views on it. Into these really interesting areas where rights collide.
Right. We haven't figured out the total path yet. Yes. Who else, Donna? Who's next?
We have Robert, and then we had Jessie had a second question.
Okay. So Bob, good morning, Bob.
Morning, Madam Secretary. Thank you for taking your time to do this. As an advocate for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, I want to congratulate you on what you already talked about with, you know, including people and trying to make this as good as possible. I did notice before you brought that up, I was going to bring up that I printed out my application yesterday for myself, and I was very happy to see that at a lot of the crucial points you had diagrams, which is something that helps everybody, but really helps people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that might not have very good reading skills, and to be able to have reminders that are diagrams, and I encourage you to put them every place you can. My question is that I'm wondering if you intend to take the time that's available and pursue going back to a full application mailing for the November election. I know it's already too late, and that's kind of fallen by the wayside for the September one, but are you going to try to get the legislatures to agree to that for the November? And then my other suggestion is that maybe it makes sense to break up the issues that we are trying to address. You know, I think possibly if the signatures were separate from the mailing in the last round, we might have gotten the signatures through. So maybe we should file 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bills instead of one comprehensive bill.
Thank you very much, Bob, for your comments. And yes, so on your first comment about the graphics, one of the things that we've done during my time has been to work with an organization that helps us do civics by design. And it's all about, you know, how do we design a government form or website in a way that the greatest number of people find it easy to use, so that you don't have to know something to figure it out. And it's been a lot of fun to do that, and to be able to work with a national group on simplifying both our ballots. You'll find those same graphics at the top of ballots now that we've designed out of my office. In any case, but the second point, on your question, I got sidetracked on I got all thinking about the civics by design. Refresh it.
The legislation.
That's right. So yeah, that's a sort of a strategy issue. You know, yes, we've missed sort of the opportunity to do it for the primary, but I am very seriously looking at sending applications to everybody for November. The challenge is not in the law. I can send out, as long as I have the money for it, which it turns out we have federal funding for COVID-related election expenses. I am able to send out a mailing to everybody. You just all got postcards, hopefully, showing you what are the 3 different ways to vote, and putting the phone number for your local board of canvassers. So mailing out, I don't need a law passed to mail out the mail ballot application. Nobody does. What we needed was the simplification on the other side of the oath envelopes, and some thought into what happens when all those applications come in to local boards of canvassers, and are they able to absorb that kind of processing in the tight timelines that we have to get the ballots out to the voters, to make sure that they have enough time to get them back. That has been the rub. And so we've been working pretty much day and night to try to figure out how to get this done. And I can't show my cards yet, but, and then we have this lawsuit now that we have to deal with, but it's coming very soon. Very soon I'll have some greater clarity about November that I think will really help people going forward. Sorry to be so.
Great. And so Jessie, you can wrap us up today with the last question.
Okay, and my kids accuse me of being Debbie Downer, but I always feel if you can foresee obstacles that you can be better prepared for them. So mine's 2 parts. One time, Secretary Gorbea, you said you had to undergo a security clearance, which I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. It made me wonder about what kind of background checks the Board of Canvassers and Board of Elections officials, if any, scrutiny they might have to undergo. And it's a 2-parter. We're in quite a large power outage today, and it made me think, oh no, you know, what thought has been given to this for if it happened to happen on election day? And thank you very much.
So thanks for your question, Jessie. So the security clearance has to do with all of the things that are happening with regards to foreign actors trying to break into our election systems. And it's really foreign actors. I mean, the domestic stuff, there's domestic stuff as well, but it's really been the foreign actors. The other person who has security clearance within the elections world is the chairwoman of the Board of Elections. And so it's really about us receiving information about what's happening so that we can take precautions locally. What I've done for increasing or improving our cybersecurity posture statewide is to work with local boards of canvassers and training them about the importance of cyber hygiene and explaining to them why it matters. It's not enough to tell people, don't share your password, don't put in, like, why? Why are we concerned about this? And the demographics are of our elections officials are, are very varied. Their experiences for the most part. I mean, I've learned stuff over the last 6 years that I never thought I would have to learn as Secretary of State. So we're only as strong as our weakest link. And so we've had a number of cybersecurity trainings, tabletop exercises, where we pretend we're on an election day and all sorts of crazy things happen. The poll books are not working. We have a power outage. We have, so that we have already given some thought as to what are we going to do if the unexpected happens. So it's not on that day. With regards to power outage, yes, we've actually thought about this. It has been a scenario that we've practiced and thought about. And it's one in which we've actually worked with the Rhode Island National Guard as well. And Rhode Island Emergency Management Agency, so we're all working together to, for example, do what happens if there's a power outage and it's on an election day. So, hopefully that helps us be better prepared for the unexpected. The unexpected, of course, by definition is not expected. But we have been working really, really hard over the last 3 years to address what might be able to happen, whether it be a security breach or a hack or just, a power outage, which seems much more mundane. It's going to be a very interesting election cycle. I think we're down to 89 days or so before November 3rd.
We have one last question, if we can squeak it in.
Sure.
Okay.
Can I track my ballot?
Yes, we are working really hard. So you have been able to track it somewhat, not as in much detail as I would have liked. But now that we've shifted our focus to encouraging people to vote from home, that's a reasonable question. And so we will be releasing a new version of the voter information. It might have already actually been released. Let me double check real quick. If you go to vote.ri.gov, you will be, actually, I just saw it. There's a button that says track my ballot, and it'll show you, when the ballot is sent to you and sort of where it is. And we've been working with the Postal Service and putting barcodes in on envelopes and stuff like that help us be able to provide some of that information. Possibly not as good as Amazon, but it's getting there. We're making great strides to be able to do that. One last word with regards to ballots and sending them back. The Board of Elections for the June 2nd primary installed drop boxes for your ballots. If you're holding onto a ballot, life has taken on, you've had to deal with a gazillion emergencies, and suddenly it's 2 days, 3 days before the election. I wouldn't risk putting it into the mail at that point. I would drive it to that secure Dropbox location. And the Board of Elections has a map where those are located, or your local Board of Canvassers knows. They're, going to be open 24/7. And it's a secure way to make sure that your ballot gets in there by the time that it has to, so that you're not, the ballots have to be received by 8 p.m. on primary day or election day.
So is that list up to date right now? Because that's probably something we should promote, where the drop boxes are going to actually be.
Check with the Board of Elections, because I don't know right now, like as of right now, where they are in that process. I know that it was very, I think we had somewhere between 3,000 or 5,000 of the ballots on June 2nd come in through the drop boxes.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that makes sense.
And if I can just, I know it's getting late and everything, but I just want to say again, what a pleasure it is to work with Representative Cortvriend on all of these issues. She's been an amazing breath of fresh air. It's hard to believe that she's got a primary, and but that's okay. That's what democracy is all about, and we don't fear it. And I know that the voters in the district will hopefully bring her back, because we need her thought process. We need her leadership. We need her vision, her energy, and optimism for what can be a better Rhode Island in the State House.
Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing this hour with us. We really appreciate it. And we will put this on We will put this up on Facebook so that we can share it and other people can watch it at their convenience. And I thank all of you for joining us today. And everybody have a great day. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.